The death of Lily and James Potter is absolutely fundamental to the story of Harry Potter. Without it, there's no boy who lived, there's no orphaned hero raised by the Dursleys, there's no mother's love protection, there's no story at all, really. It's the tragedy that sets everything into motion, and for the most part, it works brilliantly as a piece of storytelling. But, and you knew there was going to be a but, there are still some significant plot holes in how their deaths actually played out that have always kind of bothered me, and I know they've bothered a lot of other Harry Potter fans. Like, why didn't James and Lily just make themselves their own secret keepers for the Fidelius Charm? We know that's possible because Bill Weasley does it later in the series. And if they were so worried that there was a spy among their friends, and that caused them to switch from Sirius to Peter at the last minute as their secret keeper, why pick Peter Pettigrew of all people? Plus, there's always been this one lingering issue about how Peter Pettigrew retrieved Voldemort's wand from the Potters' wrecked cottage after the curse backfired. Because we knew he got it, because he has it by the time that Voldemort is resurrected in the Goblet of Fire. So today, I want to walk you through how I think the Potter's death should have happened in a version of the story that closes some of these plot holes, and I think makes the story even more emotional and heartbreaking. So let's start with the most obvious fix, the Fidelius Charm itself. Now, in the original version of the story, James and Lily decide to use this incredibly powerful piece of magic to hide their location from Voldemort. It's a smart move, absolutely. The Fidelius Charm is basically unbreakable, so long as the secret keeper doesn't betray the secret. It basically means the hidden location cannot be found. But here's where it gets weird. They decide to make Sirius their secret keeper, but then at the last minute they switch to Peter because they're worried there might be a spy among them. Whether they're worried that Sirius is the spy or that just no one will suspect that they've changed to Peter at the last minute, it's not entirely clear, but the spy is the reason they changed. But if you're worried about spies, why are you trusting any of your friends with this secret at all? We know from later in the series that you can be your own secret keeper. Bill Weasley does exactly this when he's protecting Shell Cottage. He makes himself the secret keeper, which means the only way anyone can betray the location is if Bill himself chooses to reveal it. So why didn't James and Lily just do that? Make James the secret keeper. It could of course be Lily as well, but for the rewrite it needs to be James, and you'll find out why a little later. Now here's where we get to the real meat of the problem with the original version. In the books, Peter Pettigrew betrays the Potter's location to Voldemort as their secret keeper, and then what? He just sits at home twiddling his wormy little thumbs while his master goes off to commit a double murder. I don't think that really makes sense for a few reasons. First, we know from the Goblet of Fire that Wormtail had to retrieve Voldemort's wand from Godric's Hollow, because he has it for the resurrection ritual. So Peter kinda had to be there to grab it, and he had to get there before Sirius. But more importantly, it doesn't really fit Voldemort's character at all to just trust Peter's word and go off alone. Like, think about who we're dealing with here. This is Lord Voldemort. Voldemort would want Peter there for multiple reasons. First, what if Peter was lying? What if this was some elaborate trap set up by Dumbledore? Voldemort would want Peter right there with him so he could kill him immediately if anything went wrong. Second, what if Peter had simply gotten the information wrong? What if he'd misunderstood something about the Fidelius Charm? Again, Voldemort would want to be able to interrogate and then murder his informant on the spot. And third, Voldemort is cruel. He would absolutely want to force Peter to witness the murders that he had made possible. Because that's exactly the kind of psychological torture that Voldemort inflicts upon everyone around him, particularly those he sees as lesser, and he definitely sees Wormtail as lesser. He would make Peter watch James and Lily die, knowing that it was his fault. Knowing that that happened and Wormtail had crossed the point of no return. So in my version of things, Peter is definitely there that night. Voldemort forces him to come along. Peter is probably terrified out of his mind, but he's there nonetheless. But here's the problem. If James is the secret keeper himself, not Peter, then Peter can't just tell Voldemort, this is the cottage in Godric's Hollow where they're hiding. Even if he knows the address, even if he's been there before, the Fidelius Charm would prevent him from revealing the location or leading anybody else there. So how does Voldemort get to the Potters? Well, that's where things get really clever and really heartbreaking. So this is where the plan gets truly diabolical and where Peter Pettigrew levels up from just being a coward to actively being involved. Because if Peter can't just tell Voldemort where the house is, he can't reveal the location, there's only one way this works. Peter has to lure James out of the house. Picture this. Peter lures Voldemort as close as he can. Voldemort's hiding in the shadows nearby, but Peter knows the secret, so he can go up to the house himself. So he walks up to the Potter's cottage alone, probably in the evening, and James answers answers the door and greets him, and he's relieved to see him. Peter's one of his oldest friends. He's one of the few people that knows they're in hiding. And Peter comes bearing incredible news. He's breathless, he's excited, maybe even emotional.
James, it's over. Dumbledore sent me to tell you that Voldemort has been defeated. The war is over. They got to him.
I would be willing to play Wormtail in the HBO series, just in case anybody is watching this who can make that happen. I think the emotional nature of the news he's delivering, the fake end of the war news, is enough to hide how afraid Wormtail probably is, knowing Voldemort is hiding right around the corner. So James obviously trusts Peter a lot. That's why they made him Secret Keeper in the original version. But beyond that trust, he's also been cooped up in this cottage for so long. He's probably desperate to get out, much like Sirius is in the Order of the Phoenix, after being cooped up in Grimmauld Place for the entirety of the year. So hearing this news, he's got to be overjoyed, right? He's desperate to believe that it's true, and so he steps out of the protected cottage to hug Wormtail, and as he steps over the threshold, obviously feeling like there's no need to grab his wand, Voldemort can emerge, springing from his hiding place in the shadows. James, having stepped over the threshold, is no longer protected by the Fidelius Charm, and imagine that moment. The whiplash from being so overjoyed that his family is finally safe, to this. Like the look on James's face when he realizes exactly what's happening. The way his eyes would immediately jump from Voldemort back to Peter, looking for some sort of explanation, some sign that this is a mistake. But Peter, probably as terrified as he isn't looking shocked. He isn't looking surprised. He is standing right next to the Dark Lord, and the expression on his face tells James everything he needs to know. His best friend, one of his closest companions since he was 11 years old, has betrayed him, and James Potter dies knowing that Peter Pettigrew sold out his family. And his last thought isn't confusion, it's not fear, it's the devastating realization that someone he trusted with his life has orchestrated his murder. And that's so much more brutal than the original version where James just doesn't have his wand for some reason. This way there is a clear reason why he's defenseless, and it makes Peter's betrayal so much more personal and cruel. And so here's why James had to be the Secret Keeper in this situation rather than Lily. Because the moment Voldemort's killing curse hits James, everything changes. See, there's this rule with the Fidelius Charm, right? When the Secret Keeper dies, everybody who's been told the secret becomes the Secret Keeper themselves. It's like the secret gets distributed among everyone who knew it. So the instant that James dies on the doorstep, Peter Pettigrew, who obviously knew the secret, automatically becomes one of the Secret Keepers himself. And so now he can reveal that secret to Voldemort and lead him straight to Lily and Harry. And it's this horrible moment where James's death doesn't just rob Harry of his father, but it literally opens the door for Voldemort to reach the rest of his family. James's murder is what makes Lily and Harry's murder possible. Can you imagine how twisted that would feel if James somehow knew? That his death wouldn't just mean leaving his family defenseless, but would actually be the thing that exposed them to danger in the first place. It's this perfect, awful irony. James died trying to protect his family, but his death is exactly what allowed Voldemort to find them. So Voldemort and Peter walk up to the front door of the Potter's house. Peter, now a Secret Keeper, can see it clearly, he can guide Voldemort right to it, and then Voldemort enters alone, and he finds Lily upstairs with Harry. And pretty much everything plays out as it did in the original story from then on, right? Voldemort offers her the chance to stand aside, she refuses, so he kills her. But the love protection kicks in, the curse rebounds, Voldemort lets out this almighty scream as his soul is torn from his body. So Voldemort's gone, and the house is starting to come down, right? There's been some sort of backfire, the structural integrity of the house is coming down, Lily and James are both dead, and baby Harry is somehow still alive, but now with a lightning scar. But Peter, who was waiting out on the front porch, is still there. And this is where that detail about Voldemort's wand becomes crucial. Because when the killing curse rebounds and Voldemort's body is destroyed, Peter probably hears the scream. He sees the flash of green light. Maybe he even feels the magical shockwave as one of the most powerful wizards in history is suddenly ripped from his physical form. And then silence. The cracking of the frame of the house as it's beginning to start to come in on itself. Peter's standing outside this cottage, and he knows that something has gone horribly wrong. His master was supposed to kill the Potters and walk out victorious. But instead there's this eerie quiet. And as the house starts to collapse from the magical backlash, Peter has two choices. He could just run away, but he's kind of cunning and scheming in his own cowardly way, isn't he? And he realizes something. The only people aware of his betrayal are Voldemort James, and Lily, but they're all dead. With Voldemort's body destroyed, there's actually no evidence that he was there at all, except one thing, his wand. So Peter, probably shaking with terror, but thinking quickly, rushes into the house that's beginning to come down. And he rummages through the debris, and he finds Voldemort's wand, probably right next to where Harry is crying, since that's where the curse rebounded. So Wormtail, with a quick glance at the infant that he's just turned into an orphan, indirectly, ignores his cries, grabs the wand, and runs. And this explains how the wand ended up in Peter's possession for the resurrection ritual in the Goblet of Fire. He hasn't had to orchestrate some kind of elaborate plan to heist it back from Dumbledore or the Ministry or whoever gets their hands on it. It was just Peter trying to cover his own tracks by removing evidence from the crime scene. And it's such a perfectly Peter thing to do, right? Even in the aftermath of his master's apparent destruction, even when he should be mourning the friends he just betrayed, he's still just looking out for himself first. So he takes the wand and he disappears into the night. And by the time Hagrid arrives to collect Harry, there's no trace that Peter was ever there. Well, almost no trace. Now, fixing these plot holes might have created some new ones, and I'd be lying if I said this version was perfect. The biggest issue is Sirius Black's reaction, right? In the original story, Sirius immediately knows to go after Peter because he was the one who suggested switching Secret Keepers from himself to Peter in the first place. So when the Potters die, Sirius puts 2 and 2 together. He knows Peter was the Secret Keeper, the Potters are dead, so Peter must have betrayed them. But in my version, James was the Secret Keeper the whole time. So how does Sirius figure out that Peter was involved so quickly? And why doesn't he just go straight to Dumbledore instead of immediately hunting down his friend to try and murder him? So my first thought was that maybe Peter's betrayal wasn't completely out of the blue. He'd been a spy for a while, so maybe his cover was starting to slip. Maybe he'd accidentally put his foot in his mouth when he was talking to Sirius earlier. Maybe Sirius was starting to get suspicious, and that's why Wormtail had to go to Voldemort when he did, because his cover was starting to slip. Sirius might have already been getting suspicious, so when the Potters died, Peter was his first suspect. But honestly, I don't think that Sirius would go straight to murder mode without, talking to Dumbledore first. Going to the leader of the Order of the Phoenix about his suspicions, right? Hoping Dumbledore could talk him down and give him another explanation so that he didn't have to potentially lose another friend. Something that works a little bit better would be if Wormtail had been sloppy and left some evidence at the Potters' house. Remember, Sirius arrives at Godric's Hollow pretty much as soon as Hagrid does, if not before. Hagrid gets the flying motorbike from Sirius when he brings Harry to Dumbledore at Privet Drive. So maybe, in trying to erase evidence of his presence there that night, Peter left something behind. Maybe he dropped something. Maybe he left footprints. Maybe there's just some small piece of evidence that only Sirius would recognize. Something that immediately tells him Peter was there that night. Suddenly, Sirius isn't just a grieving friend looking for someone to blame. He's someone with concrete evidence that Peter Pettigrew was at the scene of his best friend's murder. And that is enough to send him racing off to confront Peter directly. And their confrontation would play out exactly as it did in the books. Peter blows up the street, fakes his own death, frames Sirius for the whole thing, including the death of the Muggles. And that could tie it all up nicely. But I do think there is maybe something that's slightly better. Because like I said, Peter is a coward, but he's also smart. He's also cunning. So what if he had been planning this frame job from the beginning? Think about it. You're going to betray your friend to the Dark Lord. You probably want a backup plan just in case anything goes wrong. And Peter's backup plan was always going to be pinning the blame on someone else. And it makes his betrayal even worse because he's not just betraying the Potters, he's actively choosing to betray Sirius as well. So what if, sometime before the night of the murders, Peter goes round to Grimmauld Place and he takes something from Sirius? Not a belonging, he doesn't steal anything, he just plucks out a hair. Sirius would feel it, but he'd be like, what was that? Oh, maybe just some static electricity. I don't know, it's no big deal. Just Peter being weird. He thinks nothing of it for days, weeks. Maybe it even goes to the back of his mind. Maybe he's completely forgotten about it, or at least thinks it has while it stays in his subconscious somewhere. And then on the night of the murders, Peter uses Polyjuice Potion to disguise himself as Sirius when he approaches the Potter's house. Still somebody James would trust enough to come out onto the front lawn, to cross that threshold of the protections of the Fidelius Charm. But maybe as Peter approaches the house in Godric's Hollow, he makes sure that he's seen by maybe Bathilda Bagshot looking out of her window. She sees what looks like Sirius Black arriving at the Potter's house just before the explosion and the green light. Because remember, Dumbledore stationed Mrs. Fig across the road from the Dursleys to keep an eye on Harry. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that he's asked Bathilda to keep an eye on that house in Godric's Hollow. Whether she's been let in on the secret or not, maybe she's just keeping an eye on that section of the street. So that fateful night, she sees what looks like Sirius Black arriving at the Potter house, just before the explosion and the green light. Bathilda, as Dumbledore's friend, goes to him and explains what she saw, and that would explain why even Dumbledore was fooled and believed Sirius to be guilty. So when the real Sirius arrives at Godric's Hollow after the Potters have been killed, he's able to piece it together. He remembers in the back of his mind the feeling of Wormtail plucking out his hair, and that's what sends him into a rage. Not just that Peter betrayed James and Lily, but that Peter was planning to pin it all on him. It explains why Sirius was so convinced that Peter was guilty, why he was so angry, going to hunt him down immediately, without even going and speaking to someone like Dumbledore, and why the Wizarding world was so ready to believe Sirius was the traitor, including Lupin and Dumbledore. Because not only did they have the witnesses to Wormtail's murder, but they also had Bathilda as a witness who saw Sirius approaching the Potter's house the night they died. It makes Peter's betrayal even more calculated and cruel, and it gives us a much cleaner explanation for how everything unfolded that night. And if you liked hearing how I'd rewrite this part of the story, you might want to watch this video next, where I talk you through a chapter that I would add to the Deathly Hallows, which I think makes the final part of the book so much more dramatic and so much more emotional.